Today I'm going to give you 3 ultramarathon lessons from the Quebec Mega Trail 135km race. The 7th stop of the World Trail Major Series, and I was 10th at what is Canada's premier trail race. And these are the 3 lessons that I learned that I'm going to take forward into every ultramarathon going ahead. In the build up to the race, unfortunately I picked up a small injury, a strain/minor tear in my left soleus. This came out of nowhere about 6-7 days before the race, and it really did leave it in a place where I wasn't sure if I would start or I wouldn't. Managing an injury pre-race is really difficult because your inclination is to keep testing it and testing it and testing it, when actually it probably needs some rest. If you're working with a physio, you've got to trust their judgment, listen to their advice, and try to limit how much you're doing in the days beforehand and giving yourself the best chance of starting that event. My inclination was to go out and recce some of the course when I got there, the famous Mestachibo section of the race, and to see as much of Quebec and Canada as I could on my first trip. In reality, what I did was spend a lot of time laying down, relaxing, watching some World Cup football, and doing some isometric exercises on my calf to give it the best chance of healing before the Friday 8 p.m. kickoff. I waited until the Thursday to test myself out on a run, and I went and jogged down to the course, a little bit of flatter stuff and some of the more technical and steep sections of it, but only over half an hour. I found that the calf had improved. It was still 50-50 at that point whether it would last the race, but I was confident that I could start. In this situation, it's important to have a plan. What you don't want to do is leave yourself in the middle of nowhere, either a danger to yourself or causing trouble for others to come and collect you. Knowing that I had the calf injury and I had James and Sarah crewing me, we set up a really solid plan where several points where I could stop the race before I injured myself or become a burden on the organisers. Given that there was a 5k flat road section to start, that was an obvious first point. And during this section, it was maybe 1 out of 10 I could feel within the calf. The first steep climb, I managed a lot more sensibly than I might have done in the past. I hiked earlier than I would to ease into the race for the calf and kind of sound it out so that by 20k into the race, I could stop there if I needed to without going on to this next 20k section and hurting myself. The next key point we had as part of our plan was the 40k checkpoint at Massif. And at Massif, you can be crewed, but also after that, you're probably spending 6 or 7 hours on your own. And checkpoints like Cap Salou and Cap Graban are not places that you want to be stopping. I think one of them actually is a no-drop checkpoint. The way we managed things is I was checking if it was getting worse and progressively worse as I went on. The pain went from a 1 to a 2 or 3 out of 10 in the first 20-30k, but it started to stabilize around that point and actually not feel any worse by the time I got to 40k. I felt good, I'd fueled well, I'd cooled myself from the start, and I decided that I was comfortable doing the next 6-hour section without being at risk of having to stop in the middle of nowhere. The other key point here was making sure I was monitoring the injury, being honest with myself, but not catastrophizing and thinking, oh, wow, I should stop here. I can stop here. An ultramarathon is going to hurt. But if you give yourself a solid plan beforehand to manage the risk and be honest with yourself when things are happening, when it gets tough, you're not going to take the easy way out because you know people aren't going to blame you for stopping with an injury you had beforehand. But is it okay to carry on? Or is it getting tough and we're finding an easy way out? And I had to battle with that a little bit in the first section. But because I had a structured plan to get me through, this was something I was able to manage. So the main takeaway for an athlete coming into a race with an injury, if you don't have to start, don't start. Don't put yourself through an unnecessary risk. If you do feel like comfortable enough to get off the start line, have a structured plan in there for if you have to stop, if you have to DNF, and think about the risk you place to yourself and further injury, but also the burden you put on others if they have to come and rescue at a rather remote place. Next up, I want to focus on the importance of specificity when you're looking at a particular trail race overseas. The Quebec Mega Trail is probably one of the most technical events I've done. And it's not to say it was super rocky, it wasn't Trophy Okema levels of piles of rocks and boulder fields, but it was just consistently challenging in terms of rocks, roots, gradient, and having to think on your feet the whole way through this race. As in any race, there were some sections where you could switch off a little bit. The 5k road at the start, coming into the Saint-Tite de Caps checkpoint, there was a little bit of road as well, and you could switch off a little bit. But for large parts of the trail, not the Mestachibo section in particular, which had been highlighted as a really, really technical section. It wasn't super technical, but it was technical enough that you had to focus 100% of the time. So part of this is making sure that you're training on some specific terrain for the event you're doing. There are some great videos online that give snapshots of what people are tackling over the kind of hidden parts of these courses. If you look at the live footage, often you will see a lot more around the checkpoints, the road sections where it's more accessible for camera crews. But in reality, what you want is someone who's in that race in the thick of it, filming whilst they're doing it, and It shows you some of the more the unknown elements that you're going to challenge yourself with when you get out there to a race in a foreign country. When you have this information at hand, what I would do is trying to find technical trails or similar trails in your local area. Build them into your easy runs, build them into your long runs, and respect the impact it's going to have on your focus, your fueling, your hydration, and your pace over these sections. It's very easy to look at the distance, the elevation, and the time, and come up with a kind of a theory that you're going to be between certain checkpoints in X amount of time. In reality, when you look at the splits from years before, you start to understand why people are going a bit slower, and then you add in the humidity that came into it, a part of Quebec Mega Trail as well. So in terms of specificity, I also focused on the environmental conditions. I was cooling from the very start. I was shivering before we kicked off. It was 8 p.m., but it was still above 20 degrees and it was super humid. So I set off with some people looking at me funny with my Centurion ice bandana, my ice vest on beforehand. I was cold, I was soaked. I had little ice pockets in my chance running shorts. I was really going full whack on this, knowing full well that I might have to stop after 5 or 20k. That was part of it as well, as trying to focus on the task at hand and not being derailed by the injury I had in the build up, but making sure that I was doing what was right for me. I know I get really hot and humid conditions. Lo and behold, a lot of other people struggle with humidity as well. Kamil Lesniak, who won, said he found it really challenging. I think there was a chap who stopped around 20k because he was super humid and he was cramping in those conditions. So it's something to respect. But if you don't practice in that condition beforehand, or you're not aware of it, it can really derail you once you start in a long race like 135 kilometers. So the third thing I picked up, and this comes from a very unfortunate incident I had 45 kilometers into the race. I hit the ground hard. I landed on my knee, my elbow, but mainly on my hip. So at 45k, feeling good. At first, like the first point where I was thinking the calf was going to hold out, I'm lying on the ground, and it was the first time in an event where I thought, oh wow, I'm probably going to have to be rescued here. I can't really move. Once the adrenaline kind of maybe kicked in a bit and the shock of falling that hard cut wore off, I got up, I started to walk for a few steps, and then I started to jog gently downhill. Actually, jogging with quite a lot of fear about tripping again, because I knew that if I fell again in the next 10, 15 kilometers of that part of the race, that I probably was going to be in really big trouble. Post race, my hip is still really swollen. It's maybe 10 days now, and I've not been able to run. And I usually would do a little jog at this point, so it was a really big injury. You can see me limping throughout the videos. I'll play one here, so you can see me limping around 80 kilometers. It definitely impacted me. What did I do about that? And that's the kind of main takeaway from this: is how do you manage a big impact like that, a shock that you're not expecting in a race? And key for ultramarathon is adaptability, being able to kind of take 5, figure out what's happened, assess yourself, say, okay, like how bad is it? Is it going to stop me carrying on? Am I going to have to get to the next checkpoint? At one point I thought, well, do I have to go 5k backwards to the main road to make sure that I'm safe? I carried on, and as I moved more and more, it felt better and better. I was limping. I was maybe not as aware of that as I would have been, having seen the cameras afterwards, but at the time you push through and you manage it the best you can. I solved the immediate issue. So the other issue I had there was my bottle, the handle snapped on it. So I was carrying 1.5 liters because of the humidity, because of the problems I had at Mount Fuji 100 where I didn't carry enough water. I got to the next checkpoint and I made a silly decision. Instead of refilling that bottle and put it in my pockets or put it in the back of my vest, I binned it because the bottle was broken. And in hindsight, I should have carried that with me. It meant that going forward, I had a little bit less water than I needed. And I did have some problems around dehydration again. And for some reason, I didn't take a new bottle when I got to the checkpoint. I was probably looking forward to running without it. And actually, I needed to focus on having that with me. So one of the rule I would chuck in here is giving your crew solid instructions. Make sure I leave with 1.5 liters of water. That's on me, not the crew. They did a fantastic job. Once you've solved the kind of immediate issues and you're able to move forward again, I found it useful to let my crew know that I'd fallen in case they were worried I was going slower than normal. And then I thought about how it might impact moving forward. So with the limping, was it going to start causing pain elsewhere? Ironically, I couldn't really feel the calf anymore because there were 3 things on my body that was hurting more. Maybe it was getting relegated to the 4th most painful part of my body, helped me ignore it. And there's probably a psychological element to it that maybe it wasn't as bad as I was catastrophizing in my head. And after that, just control what you can control. So I made sure that I was taking extra care on the less technical sections. It's very easy to focus on the super technical bits and making sure you're not going too quick, you're moving your feet well, you're picking your feet up, you're fueling enough so you're actually like bopping around on the trails nicely, and I felt like I kept doing that. But I paid extra care when I got onto the less technical Jeep tracks, because they were a little bit overgrown. There were often rocks kind of hidden beneath little bits of grass and stuff, and those are the ones that I caught my foot on and hit the ground hard. I did fall about 8 or 9 times in the race, but most of them were comedy falls, like dipping down into a stream to soak my kit and soak my hat, and then falling over into said stream. I just found that funny. So my biggest takeaways from this race was, one, if you are injured in the build-up, there are ways to manage it. Sometimes the right call is to not race, but if you do hit the start line with a bit of an injury, have ways to manage it and make sure that you're being honest with yourself and not catastrophizing to get out of a tough race. Two, train specifically for the event if you can. Quebec Mega Trail was absolutely fantastic. I love the trails. If I was running for an hour or two, these are exactly the kind of trails I want to run on. Over 135k, they're tough. About 85% of those trails were really quite technical, and you had to focus. So making sure that your training reflects that in the build-up, and you're also pacing it with that in mind. And the last thing is that being adaptable is key. If you're going to fall over, make sure you try and do it as lightly as possible. Do it into some mud. If you do hit some rocks, look after yourself, assess yourself, and then try and find a way to move forward if that's a sensible thing to do. Drop a message in the comments if you've got big lessons you've learned from races in the past. And if you do enjoy this discussion with me reflecting on my race, we've got a Centurion Running podcast come out with me and Sarah Cameron just this week that goes into a deeper dive around post-race reflection and some learnings from Quebec Mega Trail. Thanks very much.